Hey everyone, on today's episode of the Security Swarm podcast, I've got Eric Siren on the show, and today is one of our monthly threat report episodes. And more importantly, this is one of our quarterly monthly threat report episodes, where once a quarter with this monthly report, we actually go through a big chunk of our email security data here at Hornet Security. And we look at things like the breakdown of clean emails versus non-clean emails. We look at the most popular file types used for the delivery of malicious payloads. We look at brand impersonations. We also look at what industries are being targeted more than others. On top of that, in this month's episode, we talk about how the Windows Security Summit just happened, and Microsoft, CrowdStrike, and other security vendors are talking about ways to prevent another CrowdStrike incident from happening. We talk a little bit about the new guidelines from NIST. We get Eric's take on those, and we talk about a high-severity vulnerability that allows remote code execution in the CUPS system in Linux. That stands for Common Unix Printing System. So with that, we got a lot on today's episode, so hope you enjoy it, and here we go. Hey everyone, welcome back for another episode of the Security Swarm podcast, the podcast that brings you the knowledge and insights straight from the security lab here at Hornet Security. As always, I'm your host, Andy Serwich, and I've got Eric Siren on. How's it going, Eric?
I'm all right. How you doing, Andy?
Doing good. Hey, I've got you on the show, so that must mean it's one of our monthly threat review episodes. Just an assumption. So I think you've done like the last 3 or 4 monthly threat review episodes. So you always have interesting insights, especially when we start talking about data and things. You think about things that maybe I haven't necessarily thought of. So it's always good to have your viewpoints, my friend. So thanks for being here.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And those of you watching, just a little bit of information on this type of episode. So every month here at Hornet Security, we publish a written report called the Monthly Threat Report. And quarterly on that report, we look at things like, email threats, classifications for those email threats. We look at most targeted industries, malicious file type usage, and things like that. So we talk about those data points quarterly, and it just so happens that this is one of those quarterly episodes. Now, if you're wondering what we talk about on that monthly report in between the quarterly versions, episodes, editions, we stick to more news-focused items and best practices and thought leadership, that type of thing. So regardless, I'm going to put the written report, a link to that in the show notes. So if you want to check out the written report that has all the nitty-gritty details of what we're going to talk about today, you can take a look there. Otherwise, we're going to talk about the main points and the main findings from this report in today's episodes. What do you think, Eric? Should we dive right in here? We have quite a bit to cover here, I think.
Yeah, let's get to it, buddy.
All right. So one of the first things that we always look at with our monthly threat reports, again, the quarterly versions, we focus on the data points. Now, one of the first data points we always look at is the breakdown of email threats by category, right? Clean emails versus rejected versus spam versus threat and advanced threat. Those are kind of the different classifications, right? And so we're comparing Q2 with what happened in Q3 here. And it kind of lines up with a trend that we've noticed here at Hornet Security, at least I have since I've been writing these reports, in that Q3, we always tend to see more email threats than we do during the summer months, like Q2, right? And so the amount of clean emails in the Q2 was 62.5%. 62.5% of emails were deemed clean, whereas in Q3 here, we saw that drop to 57.4. Now, the vast majority of the difference there is we saw almost that entire percentage get replaced with emails that we just flat out rejected. And when I say rejected, there were very simple, very easy identifiers on these particular emails that it was very easy to classify them as spam, either known bad domain names, known bad IPs. The material in the email was just so egregious. It was super easy to mark it as spam, right? So we just reject those outright. We're like, okay, this is so obvious. We need to do nothing else with this, right? Except reject it and be done with it. So what that tells us, though, is that the increase was mostly just an increase in those what we deem as very low effort, kind of low hanging fruit style email attacks, right? Where the threat actor, instead of, doing more advanced things like spear phishing, they're just going to catch a wide net, send out 1 million emails and hope that 0.5% is their success rate, right? Which even at 0.5%, 1 million emails, that's, still quite a few potential victims there, right? So I guess the good news here, Eric, is that it is following known trends, which I think you mentioned on a previous episode is always good news, right? But I think the interesting thing here to me is it's almost like threat actors know when people go on vacation, right? We always see fewer email threats during the summer months because not as many people are at their desk, and especially like in EU countries, right, where people might take weeks and weeks off during the summer months, and then come Q3 into the fall, and especially once we get up into the Christmas holidays, we'll see a massive increase in the amount of threats. That's my prediction, and that's based off of data. That's what we've seen in the last couple of years. But anyway, I'll let you get a word in edgewise here, Eric. I've been talking the whole time so far. What do you think?
I think your analysis is spot on. I really haven't got a whole lot to add there. You're right. I do like to see that no one's forging new territory in the email attack space, because we don't need that right now.
Right? No, we definitely don't want to see new territory, do we? But yeah, that's kind of where we stand in terms of that. The next data point we always look at in these these quarterly data points is malicious file types. So outside of your normal phishing attempts and spam and things like that, we still see a large amount of malicious emails with attachments, right? Malicious attachments. And we always look to see, okay, what are the most common file types that threat actors are using? And the top 3 here, I mean, it's, I don't know if you're a Harry Potter fan, Eric, but there's one image that goes around the internet from time to time where it's Professor McGonagall. She's looking at Ron, Harry, and Hermione, and she's basically like, "You 3 again." And that's what I think of when I see this, because it's PDF, archive files, and HTML files yet again. Month after month, it's pretty consistent that these 3 kind of trade the top 3 spots, but consistently they are always our top 3 offenders. And I mean, I look at that because PDFs have some known vulnerabilities that threat actors exploit to deliver payloads, right? Zip files, archive files, RARs, whatever archive file is your choice, those have long been used to deliver malware. And HTML files, we saw a big increase in that, I want to say 2-3 years ago. I don't remember exactly when. It was associated with QuakeBot, if I remember correctly. But the thing about HTML files is it doesn't matter what platform you're on. It can open an HTML file, whether it's your phone, Linux, Mac, Windows, whatever. It can open an HTML file, right? Now, Eric, I think what we're probably going to spend most of this time here talking about is the next 2 points I want to talk about. And it's kind of interesting. We've seen an increase in the amount of Excel and Word documents being used for the delivery of malicious payloads. And like me, you're probably thinking, well, didn't Microsoft disable macros by default in Office quite some time ago? Well, yes, they have, but threat actors are still finding very interesting ways around that. I don't know if you've seen recently any of malicious Excel or Word files in the wild, Eric. It's okay if you haven't. I'm just curious.
Fortunately, I'm not close enough to any of that I have not personally seen any. Maybe I'm getting them and they're bouncing, but No, I have not personally seen any, fortunately.
Well,
I have seen some coming through. I didn't really want to dig into it because I didn't have a sandbox environment, and I only caught on at the last second I was being phished. But it was some sort of doc inside Dropbox that looked like a PDF, but also like an Excel doc. Like, here's I forget what it was, but I don't actually know what kind of file type it was, because after a second, like, this has a really bad smell. I'm done. I'm out. And
right,
on my personal computer. And so I'm going to give you a very firm I do not know.
Okay.
on that question.
No, that's okay. That's kind of what I expected, right? And what's interesting about these, what we've seen in some of the examples of these we pulled up, is threat actors know that macros are disabled by default now. And what they're doing is they're appending these Word and Excel documents. How do I want to explain it? You know, when Word has some sort of status
Oh, they have that
message
little
for you,
arrow, like click here to enable macros
either
so that you
that
can do this.
or you ever see like that little yellow drop down from it comes
Mm-hmm.
underneath the ribbon and it's got some
Yep.
sort of like system message in it. What they'll do, especially in the case of Excel documents, is they'll take the very top row and they'll shade it that same yellow color and make it appear as if it's some sort of Excel system message like, oh, hey, in order to run this document correctly, they either walk the user through running or enabling macros, or they have them drop it into the templates folder, which I think macros are allowed to run from there anyway. So that's like the goal is they try to trick the user into poning themselves, I guess, is really what it comes down
Oh,
to.
yeah. Ouch.
So, well, you put up one roadblock, and the threat actors will always find some, rather interesting workaround, I guess.
Yeah.
So, um, just to kind of round out this data point, and I don't know if you have any comments on these, Eric, but we saw a reduction in the amount of malicious exes, executable files, by about half. We saw half as many executable files in Q3 as opposed to Q2, which is kind of
It
interesting.
sounds significant.
Yeah. And then script files, we saw a slight increase in the amount of malicious script files. I think, PowerShell, BAT, that type of thing, right? So anyway, that's what we got for malicious file types. The third data point that we look at, and again, I'm getting that image of Professor McGonagall getting after Ron, Harry, and Hermione again, you three again. Well, the most targeted industry verticals for Q3 are, drumroll, mining, entertainment, and manufacturing. And if you've watched any of these monthly threat review episodes, yeah, those are usually in the top three, at least the top five. We saw the research industry pretty high up in the rankings for quite some time. But notably, the last couple of quarters, that's dropped down, and that is near the bottom of the list now, most interestingly. But mining, entertainment, and manufacturing remain near the top. And the other interesting thing, to kind of correlate that data point we talked about earlier, where there is, we've seen basically more email attacks in Q3 versus Q2. Our monthly threat index reflects that as well. So just about every single vertical, minus the research industry, surprisingly, every other industry vertical has seen an increase in the threat index. So every industry vertical is seeing more email-based threats. So if you think you're in a safe vertical, surprise, you're not. So I don't know if that makes you feel better or worse, but there's that saying, right? We can be in misery together type of thing. I don't know what it is. Something along those lines. But anyway, you and I have discussed this a little bit before, Eric, in that when we look at these top three industries, mining, entertainment, manufacturing, I think it's worth noting that I could see there being kind of I don't want to say an overlap, but when we talk about classifications, I know that those mining-oriented businesses that I've worked with in the past, you can almost treat them like a manufacturing, almost like a manufacturing company, because they have a lot of the same problems, a lot of the same struggles. Usually very similarly structured to a manufacturing facility. Not always, but in my experience. So I see them as having a lot of the same issues as a manufacturing business, using things like PLCs, I can never say this, programmable logic controllers. those sensor devices.
PLCs is fine. I think most people know what you mean.
I think so. But yeah, those PLCs, they basically are IoT devices that are on manufacturing lines, very sensors, sometimes HVAC systems. And like IoT control or IoT devices, they get deployed and are rarely ever touched again after that point. And so I see those as being a big vector of attack, especially if they're talking to the internet, Eric. Now, I know you're in the healthcare space, so I imagine you guys probably pay a little bit more attention to those IoT related devices in your ecosystem. But I imagine you
Oh
have
yeah.
some of the same challenges, right?
Sure. I mean, yeah, a lot of devices now, especially everybody's overworked, nobody has enough staff. So we do rely heavily on a lot of network devices to call home to some sort of central. It's hard to say, but like, maybe you have devices that'll call to a nursing station. So you'll have a nurse or three who are responsible for a ward.
All right.
And so all the devices in that ward then report to that nurse's station. So yeah. So I know for us, we don't want them on the internet for about a billion reasons,
Right.
but that doesn't mean there's not a path, you know what I mean,
Right.
back in. So yeah, we keep a
Right.
pretty close eye on that stuff.
And I feel like with some businesses, it's almost like there has to be law or compliance requirements to make them care about these things, right? And so, like,
100%.
yeah, like you said, you guys keep a pretty close eye on those. But I've seen some manufacturing organizations that just like, they don't even know the PLCs are out there, let alone that it's an attack vector,
No.
right?
Well, and you would also, I think there's probably a thing like if you do IT for like a bank, then you never want to go to a bank again. You never want to trust one. And
Right.
I can tell you there are a lot of people further up in the healthcare chain that I feel the same way about. Like, how are you even in the healthcare supply anywhere since you clearly do not care about patient data safety, anything? Why? This seems like a really odd vertical for you to voluntarily get into. And then you move out of healthcare and like, yeah, banking and finance. I've been really appalled at just how little some people care.
Right.
And so, yeah, I hate to, I don't really want to be a sky is falling kind of guy, but I have said for a long time what usually keeps us safe is that the so called bad guys are usually not any smarter than the so called good guys. And we're so that, yeah, it.
Yeah, I'm with you there. It's it definitely makes things interesting, and I've been in that situation before too. Where have you ever had it where, and this hasn't happened to me for years, thankfully. I remember at an old job long, long ago, just remember somebody saying something and just looking at them like, "Wait, what? How are you doing the job that you're allegedly doing?" It was something like, oh, I forget what it was. Something about VNC being able to traverse firewalls without needing a firewall rule in place, and I'm just like, no, it doesn't work that way.
I would certainly hope
I
not.
would.
What are we doing here?
I know. I hope not. And I think the other one. This was not a coworker. This was many years later, in a much different context. But somebody actually saying the words to me like, "I don't need a firewall because I have a domain controller." And well, I think maybe
Oh yeah, I remember you telling me that one. That's
that's a good one too. We should do a whole episode that's just stuff like this. Just we should
oh
have
man,
listeners write in their stuff and we just kind of read them back. That's a great idea. I'm gonna run with that.
episode of cringe.
Yeah, that should be a fun one. Yeah.
Oh
So
no.
either,
And they're out there, and they have your credit card information in their databases.
yep,
And yes, they have all of that. And like, we're only not hacked yet because the hackers haven't figured,
they haven't found us yet.
they haven't found us. It's everybody's like security by obscurity doesn't work. I'm like, well, only if they're determined. Other than that, it's probably the only thing holding the planet up.
Right. Oh, good times. There's something there. We have to come back to that one. So anyway, coming back to our data points, the last data points that I wanted to discuss is impersonated brands. So, being an email security provider, we're always looking for brand impersonations in email. And so it's something that we track on the regular. And when we look at Q3, the top offenders are DHL and DocuSign by quite a bit. So DHL, no surprises. We see shipping brands usually in the top, first or second place. It was FedEx for quite some time, but we actually saw quite a reduction in FedEx from Q2 versus Q3. It's still there. It's in the fifth place, but it's not in the first place anymore. So, and those are your typical scams. It's like, hey, we were unable to deliver this to your address. Click here to schedule delivery, and you click there to schedule delivery. It's, there's a $2 processing fee. Insert your credit card details, and there you go. That's the threat vector there. DocuSign, not really a big surprise. I'm surprised that we're seeing more DocuSign in Q3 than we are Q2. But I think that's because this is more of a global picture, right? We're not looking at just the US. It's more global. Because in the US, of course, around April 15th, you have tax season, right? Everybody has to get their taxes in, and we usually see quite a bit of DocuSign brand impersonation around that time period. So, but yeah, we're seeing that's in the second place so far. So anyway, other notable items on the list, American Express. We saw more than twice the number of American Express brand impersonations in Q3, and we could attribute that to the summer travel months, right? People are using their American Express card more. Threat actors know that. They know that they're going to be receiving American Express related emails. And so all they got to do is catch that one person looking for an American Express email at just the right time, right? Other than that, some of the other usual offenders in our top 10, Netflix, Amazon, MasterCard, MetaMask is involved in the crypto space, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, their browser-based wallet.
Yep, exactly. So that's what I got. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Eric, before we move on to our news-related items.
Let's hit the news, man. I'm excited about that.
All right. Well, it's security news. Some of it might be good. Well, I think I actually do have one good news item this month. No, actually two good news items this month. It's not doom and gloom this month like it is some months. But anyway, the first one is we're going to talk about CrowdStrike. You and I talked about CrowdStrike on this show not that long ago, right? And of course, this is that incident from the summer that is still clearly etched in everyone's minds, where a CrowdStrike client update basically blue screened a number of boxes around the world. I forget exactly what it was. I have to go look at that episode, Eric. I think it was like 1% of machines that were impacted, if I remember correctly. But the thing is, it was a very important 1% of machines worldwide. So I don't think that's. I think we talked about how that's not really a. You can't really use that as a argument for why it's not that bad, right? Because of course,
right.
And I was on the receiving end of that because we were in California at the time trying to get back to Michigan. And of course, we were flying Delta, which I think is the airline that was hit the hardest by the whole thing. So that was, fun times. Anyway, so in the wake of this incident, Microsoft, they scheduled a Windows Security Summit where they got together with a bunch of security vendors from the industry and basically said, hey, how do we not do this again? Which, valid question. And basically what came out of that is Microsoft has committed to a number of things. I think the most important one that really stood out to me is that they want to take active steps to move those current hooks that security vendors have in kernel mode and move as much of that stuff out of kernel mode as they possibly can. And so I'm going to quote Microsoft's a statement from their actual blog post here. And I've got the blog post linked inside of the written document. I'll put the blog post in the show notes as well. But they say here, and I quote, in addition, our summit dialogue looked at longer-term steps serving resilience and security goals. Here, our conversation explored new platform capabilities, Microsoft plans to make available in Windows, building on the security investments we have made in Windows 11. Windows 11 improves security posture and security defaults, enable the platform to provide more security capabilities to solution providers outside of kernel mode, unquote. And so one of the big, I guess, one of the big things they took a lot of flack for during that incident, even though it wasn't them that caused the issue, it was CrowdStrike, right? Was it started begging the question like, well, why does Microsoft allow security vendors to have this level of access into the kernel, right? And so it seems like they're taking that seriously, which to me is good news. I don't know what your thoughts are.
I have concerns,
Right?
because kernel hacking is not going away.
Right. Agreed.
And I fear that, because there's been this long running thing for as long as I can remember, that, people, when their computer breaks, first thing they do is thanks Microsoft. It's like their gut response. Thanks Microsoft.
Right.
And yeah, okay. I don't think Microsoft told CrowdStrike to write a bad. And how many times have you seen it? Like, that's not really Microsoft's fault. What you're looking at is not Microsoft's
Right.
fault.
Agreed.
But they're the same people that I remember calling in. Well, my Microsoft is broken. Okay, so what does that mean? And then you get down to it, and it turns out like it's whatever they're upset about had nothing to do with Microsoft at all.
It's a website
It's just
that they're trying to access using Firefox.
yeah, and like, okay, but yeah, exactly. So I worry that in trying to, because Microsoft needs to look like they're doing something.
Right.
Okay, that's fair. But again, kernel hacking is not going away. And it's easier to lie to a program in user space than it is to lie to one that's running in kernel space. So if we're locking out the people we should be able to trust because CrowdStrike betrayed that trust,
Right.
who benefits?
Yeah, that's true.
Is it us as the end user? Is it the attackers who can still play around in kernel space because they're breaking it, while the good guys who didn't do anything wrong are now like, all right, well, we'll follow the rules. We'll do this user mode stuff. I don't know. There's a lot of really big questions here. I do have concerns. I hope that they do this intelligently and not as a knee-jerk reaction to CrowdStrike, because CrowdStrike messed up. They really did.
Right.
That needs to be held out there. That's on them. And
so
Microsoft should not lower its trust in its vendors, or it shouldn't have to, is what I guess I'm getting after.
Correct.
Is if CrowdStrike can't do this, then the people, because even now I'm starting to see memes and things going around on the internet. If you think this way, you must be somebody who buys CrowdStrike products. And I'm like, oh, okay, so now we're turning that into an insult.
Oh no.
And we're shaming people who buy CrowdStrike. So it may yet come around that CrowdStrike may solve itself, because people may just like, we're done. We'll never trust you again. That could very well happen. And then Microsoft's doing all this stuff to lock out a company that's, and nobody else wants to be CrowdStrike. I can tell you that right now.
Right.
So,
and
I have concerns that we're going to make the solution worse than the disease.
And very valid concern. I completely agree. I was just looking at the quote just a little bit further and reading through it. Again, I'm going to quote another section of their statement here. Both our customers and ecosystem partners have called on Microsoft to provide additional security capabilities outside of kernel mode. Now, I look at that and I wonder if the plan is to not take existing things away, but to provide more capabilities outside of kernel mode that the security vendors could move certain things to, maybe those things that are more apt to blue screen a machine, move those out to user mode.
Yeah.
I mean,
and at this point, it's so nebulous.
Right.
And I will very quickly exceed my actual concrete knowledge on this stuff. I have a very good general idea of it, but you get into the actual hooks and things that are going on, and man,
we're not kernel programmers by any stretch of the imagination, especially for me.
Right. I mean, I've done some driver stuff, and there are ways to write a driver to blue screen Windows. You can do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I've talked about before. Like, if you put your kernel into an uncertain state, it's got to do something about that. And most kernels decide, I'm done. We're not doing this anymore. We're going to crash right now. I don't know what you're doing, and because I don't know what you're doing, we're all through.
Bye now.
Yeah. Yes, we're going to crash. And it's you take any other program, and that's what they do. I don't know what's going on. Crash. Well, if it's not your operating system, well, then it's just an obnoxious, my program shut down.
Right.
Well, when it's your operating system, that's a lot more disruptive, clearly. So, but you're in a place of, well, where are you going to do this work if you're not going to do it? It's just, I have a lot of concerns.
Yeah. So they didn't provide a lot of details other than that, other than saying, hey, we got together and we chatted, and this is what we're thinking. I think this is going to be something that we're going to have to keep an eye on in the coming weeks and months just to kind of see where they land on this. But I think it's beneficial that they're at least having the conversation, right? And I think their head's in the right place and like, let's improve this situation, right? And so
let's improve it. And that's what I really want them to put all their effort into. Let's look improvement, straight up improvement.
Yep.
Like this. Maybe we have had this thing that, because it never caused a problem before, we knew about it, but we kind of let it go because it was obviously not a problem. And well, now CrowdStrike has made it a problem. Now we have to deal with it. Okay, sure, fine.
Yep.
Those things, yeah. But if it's going to be like, well, let's just start locking people out of the kernel routines. Cool. Now, how do I keep the attackers from doing that? Because I don't think the rules are going to work the same. I think it's still going to be, if you know what you're doing, because you can go out on GitHub right now and spend a little bit of time and find all kinds of ways to inject stuff into Windows kernel mode.
Yep.
Now, they do require like administrative. It's not a thing you can just do, right? But point being, if we're going to say, here's an antivirus vendor who's trying to do the right thing and stay out of there. Here's an attacker who's not going to do that.
Right. And it's funny.
Right. And then the attacker gets into kernel mode, sends something that's lies to the antivirus in user mode, because kernel mode can do that.
Yep.
Who benefits? Who's actually winning here? The antivirus vendor who's trying to do the right thing and not be the next CrowdStrike? It's essentially like, oh, here, have a free in-memory rootkit. It's kind of similar to that.
Yeah, that's true.
Again, I want to reiterate, I am talking somewhat out of turn here. They're
valid concerns, though.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting we're having this conversation because you talk about things infiltrating kernel mode. The episode's not out yet, but our friend Paul Schnackenberg and I, we actually did an episode where we kind of dissected the security of the Windows boot process. And right now I've got that scheduled for release for episode 68. So keep an eye out for that. But we talk about some of this stuff during that conversation about how rootkits and bootkits can actually infect kernel mode, right out of the gate. Right. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
Some of the things we're talking about here, they kind of correlate.
I hope you had a nice little conversation about secure boot, because I'm really concerned. And
Sure
there are times I go out on a forum and I'll see somebody who goes, yeah, I had this virtual machine that was fine, and now it has a secure boot thing. And literally first answer is, well, turn off secure boot. No, whatever. Don't do that.
Yeah.
And of course they're like, well, thanks, Microsoft. Like, no.
Secure boot is great. I love secure boot.
At worst case, they've broken secure boot, in which case it doesn't do its job.
Right.
If secure boot won't let your virtual machine start, it's doing its job.
There's a reason.
Don't fight it.
There's a reason. Agreed. I love secure boot, and we actually talk quite a bit about secure boot. We also talk about the I want to say it was 2023. It's in the episode that I'm talking about. But we talk about the leak of platform keys that impacts the security of secure boot. So that's a great episode.
So secure boot failing to start a virtual machine is probably a very clear warning.
Correct.
Because like when it's broken, that means they took the key and they're booting a rootkit anyway, and secure boot is none the wiser. So if it let it start, that is not a great thing. But if it doesn't let it start, you should trust it. You're like, okay, something's not cool.
Not right. Yep. Agreed.
Something is not right.
Agreed. Yeah. So be on the lookout for that episode, folks. That's going to be episode 68, where we kind of dive into that. But as for this episode, Eric, we've got two more news items. This next one's going to go really fast for a reason that will become very apparent. We spent some time talking in the written reports about the new password guidelines from NIST. Well, if you've been watching the show, you know that Michael Posey and I talked about that in last week's episode, I think it was, as of the time of this recording. And so I'll put the link to that in the show notes. You can take a look at that. But I want to get your take, Eric, on some of the changes really quick before we move on to our last news item. But some of the biggest changes in NIST's recommendations are that when we talk about password length, absolute minimum of 8 characters, but they recommend 15 or more. So we know, from password security that longer passwords equals more entropy, which means stronger password, right? Harder to guess. One of the other recommendations they made is that password composition rules should be removed. Things like, oh, this password needs one special character, one number, and one uppercase letter. It doesn't contribute to additional strength of the password, right? I mean, they're going to brute force the character set just the same way as they would if it was, just simple letters and numbers, right? So no surprise there. This one I was very happy to see, and there's not enough people that have gotten this message yet. So a while ago, NIST came out with the recommendation, keyword here, recommendation a couple of years ago, that there should be no forced password changes unless evidence of breach. That was a recommendation. They've now updated their wording and say that providers shall not. They've moved from recommended to shall not require periodic password rotations unless evidence of breach. So instead of just recommending it now, like if you want to be compliant with NIST password guidelines, like you don't require regular password rotations. And the reason being is if you're not aware, password rotations make end users do dumb things like serialize passwords. Spring 2024, summer 2024, fall 2024, things like that, right? And it doesn't really contribute to extra password strength. And then to round this out, just before I get your comments on this, Eric, the last thing that I found was very interesting was they're now recommending that password providers allow the use of ASCII and Unicode character sets within passwords, which I think is cool because
overdue.
Yeah, long overdue. And it gives us far more characters to choose from for our passwords. So
increasing entropy.
Exactly. So
I mean, if you're a cool guy and you know something from kanji or whatever, and you can just like intersperse that in your passwords, well, man, you got me beat, right?
Oh yeah, so for sure.
You're gonna throw some serious entropy in there, and just cool.
For sure. So what are your thoughts? Anything that
so I don't want to step on your and Brian's toes. I can kind of get an idea. I will say this. What I would like is for NIST to come out and say, all of you people who are blocking pasting of passwords, stop. Actually, stop. You're not doing anything good. Because if I'm a hacker, I know how to get around that. But me as a regular dude just trying to put my password into my Panera account, I'm sorry, I don't know why I called out Panera. I don't know if they do it or not. I know that we're not going to let you paste your password from your password manager in here. Like, cool, then guess what I'm doing? I'm leaving because no.
Right.
No, I'm not. I use a password generator. It's got these incredibly complex, incredibly long. No.
With a high degree of entropy
I wish
as
NIST
well.
or somebody. Yes.
Yep.
Yes, I've done all the right things that I should be doing, and I have an extremely complex password that locks down my password manager, and all. I've done all the things I'm supposed to do, and they're like, we're not going to let you paste.
Yep.
Bye. And stop. Actually stop.
Right.
You're not improving security. You're making it worse.
Right. And
because now what I'm going to do is reset my password to password 13. Because I can remember that and I can type it easily. No. Fortunately, I don't think I've seen anybody lately where it mattered.
Right. And so,
but I've taken to certain things like maybe I won't do that, but sometimes I'll set it to something that's really stupid so that I can get it in on the big computer, because I'm the old guy, so I do things on the big computer with the big keyboard, and then I get on my phone and I hate it. Yeah,
there's something to that.
Yeah, I can't type on this thing.
I hate typing on phones too. It's terrible.
Yeah, so I'll go on. I'll make it something simple on the big computer, do it on the phone until it's done, and then go reset it on the big computer again.
Yeah.
So, which is not cool. It's not right. But again, most of these companies don't. They're not like life changers. So I guess my bank's not doing this to me. So
right.
But okay, I've really hijacked a lot of time here, but all I want to say is NIST, please come out and say, allow paste into password fields, providers shall.
So I'm going to have to go look and so the 4 bullet points I mentioned were the big ones. So
and I'll let you and Brian have them,
I don't know for 100% sure if they included your clipboard mention or not. I'm going to have to go back and look, but it didn't jump out at me when I read through the new document. I'll put a link to the document. That's NIST 863B. I'll put that in the show notes. You folks can check that out. But I don't recall any mention of the clipboard in there. I could be wrong. But,
I can see them wanting to stay out of it, but still, please.
yeah, would make sense. So
because you've got people out there making really, really poor decisions based on. I don't even know. I don't know whether. Why do you think that pasting is so evil?
Right. So, well, good commentary there.
What's on the clipboard is my problem, basically. Where,
that's true.
If that's what they think. Well, if you're not putting it on the clipboard, well, what do you got to get from A to B somehow? So,
yeah. For your average user,
if it's got to go through here, that's
kind of needed for your average user for sure. For sure. So the last item on our,
especially when I'm out there going like use password manager, stop using my Bell's 13 for every single password on every single website. Don't do that. Use a password manager, and it makes it really hard to convince people to do that. And we're like, well, but I can't.
That's very good feedback, because we've been telling people to use password managers all this time. Right? So,
and when they've got a valid reason to say no, great.
Hard to make that argument for sure. So. Well, the last item we have on our list, with the couple minutes we have left, Eric, is are you ready for a Linux vulnerability?
Oh, I saw that one.
Yeah, you probably know which one I'm talking about. Of course, I'm talking about the remote code execution vulnerability in the CUPS subsystem inside of Linux. And if you're not familiar with what CUPS stands for, Common Unix Printing System. So it's basically the print server component of most Linux distributions. I shouldn't say most. Like CUPS has been around for freaking ever. It's been around forever. And so it comes down to 4 different CVEs that kind of build this vulnerability. So we've got CVE 2024, 47067, 47175, 176, and 177. And I've got it in the written reports, all the links to those. So you can go see exactly how the attack chain works. Again, it's these 4 vulnerabilities kind of working side by side. But what it comes down to just kind of keep things simple and let you know what to look out for. If you have any Linux systems running inside your infrastructure, you want to see if, one, any of them have the CUPS daemon service running. And if it is, turn it off if you don't need it. 2, if you do need it, this vulnerability works by connecting with the affected system via UDP port 631. And so if you absolutely need that service running, you want to tightly control access to, again, UDP port 631 on that particular system. And it has the vulnerability basically has something to do with the way that, if UDP port 631 sees an incoming request coming in that says, hey, let's make a new printer, it will go ahead and do that. And it could allow a threat actor to create a malicious printer object, basically, which they then could utilize to, again, remote code execution, which is never great, right? So, again, they'd have to have access to your environment already in some way, shape, or form. And I don't know how many systems are listening on UDP port 631 on the public internet, but I've seen weirder things. So, worth checking out if you have those types of systems in your environments. And I think this would apply to some IoT devices as well. I don't recall seeing any IoT devices with CUPS running on them, but a lot of them run Linux, and CUPS is running by default on some Linux distributions. So worth checking out. That's my thoughts on the matter. I don't know about you, Eric.
I think you knocked that one out. Yeah. I don't see a lot of CUPS on across my Linux system, so it was kind of, okay, well, that's kind of horrifying that's. So yeah, and I had a lot of questions like how long has that been hanging out there? Do they just catch that? Is that a new thing?
For some reason, I want to say 93. It's been out here. It's been out there for a long.
Well, I don't.
time.
I mean the vulnerability, or I know the product. There's CUPS has been around forever.
So don't quote me on 93. For some reason I want to say 90. Maybe it was 2003. All I know is that the person that discovered the vulnerability, it's in the CVEs, said this vulnerability has been hanging out here unknown for a long time. Long time. So maybe it's been
used proof in security by obscurity works for a while and then it doesn't. So.
Well, I mean, who would have thought to like look in cups? You know, like if I'm a threat researcher, like, what program am I going to try to break today? Yeah, let's go use cups in Linux. Like
I mean, maybe I'm thinking about it wrong, but my whole thing would be like, which services are running all the time in most of the places?
yeah,
I need to see all of those. That would be how I would do it. Maybe I'm not doing it right. I don't
you know
know.
that
But
brings me back to the XZ utils vulnerability that happened. I want to say 6-7 months ago. That one was crazy, and there was an episode of the show where we talked about that. So I'll link that episode in the show notes as well. But that one was even crazier because a malicious actor actually took over and assisted with package management of the XZ utils package for like 2 years. And then after 2 years decided that they were going to inject malicious code into it. And I'm going off memory here, so don't quote me on this. But if I remember correctly, the affected version of XZ utils, when paired with SSH, allowed you to bypass SSH authentication.
oh my.
Yeah, so
Well, that's
it was
lovely.
a really bad one. Thankfully, the community caught it, and I think it only made it as far as the testing release for most major distributions. But that could have been like, apocalyptic, right? So
Oh, absolutely.
anyway, yeah.
Wow.
So it just goes to show that open source is great. I love open source, but it's not immune from this type of stuff, right?
Oh, no, none of it is. But you also have to remember that back, I'm about to date myself here. I clearly remember a time when the most common distribution for viruses was on manufacturer print. The software vendor
Oh
bought the
yeah.
floppies in bulk and put all their software on the floppy and then labeled it. And so it would have a Microsoft or whatever label on it. That's how you got most of your viruses at one point, is somebody sitting there, his job is to make 10,000 of these floppy disks. And he's like, I'm mad. Virus, 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 virus. So yeah,
Good
it's
times.
basically that's it. You just get yourself in a supply chain somewhere. So that's always been the attack vector, whether closed source, open source. Yeah.
I think we're going to have a whole episode at some point about supply chain. The one thing that comes to mind, of course, recent news as well, is the whole deal with the exploding pagers. The exploding pagers news. And of course, just take a Google search for that. Well, maybe not that exact term. You probably end up on a list somewhere. But I think it was Hezbollah was targeted with. Was it Hezbollah? I think it was targeted with
It was.
exploding pagers. And so you think about the supply chain implications of that. Like, I mean, that.
So many. I had a lot of questions when I read that, like a lot of questions.
Right? So we're going to have to talk about the digital supply chain at some point, because, yeah, there's a lot of vulnerabilities there, right, for any given organization. Anyway, we are past time, my friends, so I want to thank you for spending some time with us and sharing your knowledge and insights as always, Eric. Appreciate having you.
Appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And those of you watching, hopefully you found some value in today's episode. If you did, be sure to like or smash that like and subscribe button. You can also find us on all the major podcasting platforms. So chances are, wherever you consume your content, you can find us. With that, we'll let you get back to your day. Stay safe out there. We'll see you again next week for a future episode of the Security Swarm podcast. Have a good one.